Good morning. It is what? Hang on. I feel like I'm not centered properly. Good morning. It is 8:32 a.m. on Sunday, January 3rd, 2021. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. I actually didn't feel very good yesterday. I was kind of migrainey and feel like I got some mild food poisoning. Didn't feel very good yesterday most of the day at all, so I didn't end up even playing Dungeons and Dragons, which was disappointing. I do feel better today. So, I still feel a little like I could go back to bed. I could sleep some more for sure. But I think I won't because, as mentioned yesterday, I'm going to try to see if I can shift the sleep window back to the more normal period now that I'm coming out of this holiday break. So, at the risk of dating myself on this daily video that I do, I did check Twitter a little bit this morning before doing the video, and I saw that there's some recent Twitter debate about this guy who posted a tweet thread where he's very pleased with himself about having taught his daughter a lesson in problem solving and critical thinking by making her learn how to use a can opener uh, you know, um, in, but the reason that people are, in my opinion, kind of rightfully criticizing is that it's one thing to say that it's good for a kid to learn problem solving, critical thinking, to think about how tools work, and understanding that even sometimes the most mundane of things um, has a lot of interesting engineering and insight built into it, and being able to see that and appreciate using the right tool for the job and that sort of thing. Like, those are all good lessons. But the way this guy teaches that lesson apparently is that he waits for his daughter to already be hungry for lunch and then declares that she can't eat until she figures out the can opener. And 6 hours later, she finally does. And he, I guess, is there with her. At least it's hard to know based on his tweet thread how much of the time he was actually attentive, because he talks about how he was actually letting her just do that across the room while he was working on a jigsaw puzzle. But he also talks other times about looking at the tool with her and that sort of thing. But basically, the what's really frustrating about that story for me is that, on the one hand, I understand some of the impulse. It's like what I was saying. I think tools are actually pretty neat. And I think it's good to learn how to develop problem solving skills and to be able to approach, let's look at the design of a thing and try to figure out how it works and that sort of thing. But I also know that if I ate breakfast hours ago and now am hungry for lunch, the idea of trying to solve a complicated problem that I've never done before and taking 6 hours to do it without eating anything in the meantime is a recipe for making myself extremely unhappy. It's also not how actual engineering works. And this is something that I feel like I have some insight in. I mean, I don't want to pretend like I'm an authority and no one else knows, but I did get a degree in chemical engineering, and that includes, some courses that are just general engineering of, not chemical specific. I took a class when I was a freshman that was, like introduction to some of these engineering principles. And one of the exercises we did that I thought was actually pretty neat is that the professor obtained for us some obscure materials, or like old tools, or pieces of some larger whole or something, where it's clearly one component or it's a tool or a piece of machinery or something like that that has not obvious, like it's not obvious what it does. And what we're supposed to do is to try to apply critical thinking to what do we think this was used for. And in some cases, they were things for like, you know, a tool that you needed for a certain kind of a machine that isn't actually used for anything anymore. Or sometimes it was like, okay, well, this is something that you would use to hold a lot of individual pieces in place so that they could be loaded into another frame. Or, hey, this is a chunk of a grating that you would use when you have someone coming in from bad weather and they want to allow the snow or ice or salt or whatever to be scuffed off their boots, but then fall to somewhere where it could be cleaned up later and not tracked into the rest of the room, right? And so it was an interesting exercise, but it's not how actual engineering gets done. Because one of the things that's maybe not obvious to people who haven't taken engineering is that a lot of engineering classwork and exams are open book. Because although there's frequently a lot of formulas and math involved when you're doing certain kinds of engineering, the expectation is not that, oh, you must memorize all of these formulas. Like I took classes where that was the case. Like organic chemistry, for example, does expect you to do that sort of thing. But engineering, that's taught by the chemistry department. The engineering department is focused on, it is a waste of time and effort and energy to try to figure out something that is already known to someone else and could just be looked up. And part of engineering is about optimizing. And although it can be fun and exciting and a challenge to occasionally make a puzzle of something, it's not how you do real engineering. Like it's a diversion, not the meat of it. Because if you are trying to figure out how to use a new tool for the first time, trying to just work on it until you do it is a good way to break something. Might break the tool, might break what you're trying to use the tool on. You might hurt yourself, right? Whereas going through the appropriate training to make sure you use the tool properly is considered good engineering, because that way you don't spend a lot of extra time not accomplishing anything because you tried to figure something else out on your own that you could have just looked up. Now that doesn't always work, right? Like you need both. But it's also true that you don't do your best learning when your body's under stress. And so the idea of already being hungry and having to go another 6 hours, and this is for a 9-year-old, is like, it reminds me of the idea of altitude training, right? The idea of athletes who want to be able to have the best performance. And this is another lesson I learned in engineering classes, where it's true that people who live at higher altitudes tend to have a higher concentration of red blood cells. And that allows them to metabolize oxygen more efficiently, which allows them to do better at higher altitudes than someone who, grows up in a low altitude. Now, and I know this firsthand because I grew up in Colorado, which is at a higher altitude. And I know firsthand that acclimatization comes and goes. It's not permanent. I grew up there, but now because I live at sea level here in Boston, every time I go back to Colorado, I feel the difference because it doesn't last forever. And so I find myself huffing and puffing a lot quicker when I go back to visit Colorado. I remember one time when I went back to Colorado and we went straight up into the mountains for a camping trip right when I got there. I had a very bad time because it was such high altitude. And so it's a meaningful difference, right? But it's also true that if you, as an athlete, let's say you are all the time, like this is a bad example. I'm trying to. Uh, okay, so I'm. It's not a bad example. I need to organize my thoughts. Essentially, what you're getting at is that if you want to try to manipulate your body's response to the altitude in order to optimize your performance as an athlete, an old school way of approaching that would be to say you need to make yourself work harder by going and training at a high altitude, right? The thing is, though, that does not actually work, because the way that your body accumulates this higher concentration of red blood cells is by spending long periods of time at high altitude, not by going up to high altitude and doing a run and then coming back down. No, the way that you do altitude training is you live at a higher altitude, so your body naturally has the higher concentration of red blood cells. But then when you want to train, you go down to a lower altitude where there's more oxygen available. And then you are able to push your body harder for longer during training because there's more oxygen available. And so what I would say, in order to translate that to this approach of, let's see, how do we teach kids to be able to approach these complicated problem-solving techniques, is to say, live in an environment where those sorts of ideas and conversations are part of the ongoing discussion all the time. Live at a high altitude. But when you're specifically challenging yourself, make sure you have the right tools and support available. Train at a low altitude. So I guess that all just comes around to say, I think there are a lot of people on Twitter pointing out that this guy teaching his daughter how to use a can opener, or rather not teaching her and specifically making her learn herself. And a can opener, by the way, is a very counterintuitive mechanism. I bet you didn't learn how to use a can opener all by yourself when you were hungry at 9. It's kind of like complaining that someone doesn't know how to change a tire. It's like, I bet you didn't figure out how to change a tire all by yourself. Someone showed you, probably, right? And my guess is that if no one showed you and you had to figure it out by yourself, it took a lot of time and was a lot more unpleasant than it would have been if someone had just taught you. Yeah. So I guess what it comes down to ultimately is I am an engineer at heart. I really like the idea of figuring things out and challenges and solving puzzles and learning how to use tools properly. But the real way to do it is not to just soldier on ahead and try and beat your head against a wall for 6 hours when the answer is actually readily available. Or in this case, for her, it was not, because the dad wouldn't give it to her. But I would say, if, as someone who's been in the industry for a while, if we had 2 brand new green engineers recruited, and I gave them both a problem that they had never done before, which was use a certain tool, how to do a certain task, and one of them took all day and beat up a bunch of the material and sprained their wrist, but they eventually figured it out and they were very proud of themselves. And the other one said, hey, can you show me how to do this? And then I showed them how to do it for 5 minutes, and then they went and did it, and they were done in half an hour, and then came back to me and said, okay, what next? Guess who I am more impressed with? Anyway, I had opinions about that, apparently. So, not a very organized thought, but these are things that are important to me. Don't make your hungry kid wait an additional 6 hours figuring out how to use a can opener by themselves. Like, if you want to teach them how to use a can opener, get them some cheese and crackers to snack on while they work on it. And yeah, and also maybe teach them that looking up a YouTube video on how to use a can opener is an entirely reasonable way to solve the problem. You don't waste time and energy doing stupid stuff when there's readily answers available. You don't advance the frontiers of science by relearning the stuff people knew 200 years ago. You stand on the shoulders of giants. You don't run around the giants' ankles feeling frustrated that you're not taller. What you do is you say, hey, those people figured out how to be all the way up there already? Good. I can skip that part and keep going. All right. Anyway, I'll leave it there, and I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.